The Quiet Revolution, A Tale of Grey Divorce. Chapter 1, The Morning That Changed Everything. The soft piano music faded as Eleanor turned off the radio in the kitchen. She stood by the window, staring at the picket fence that bordered their two-story home in suburban Connecticut. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the garden she'd tended for decades, roses, hydrangeas, and a small vegetable patch where she'd once grown tomatoes with her children. But today, it felt hollow. At 58, Eleanor had lived in this house for 37 years, since she and Robert had married, fresh-faced and full of dreams. They'd raised 3 children here, welcomed 4 grandchildren, and built a life that, from the outside, looked like the American dream. But this morning, she'd woken up with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She traced her finger along the edge of the windowsill, where a small crack in the paint revealed years of wear. The house was full of such imperfections now, little reminders of time passing, of a life lived but not always cherished. Eleanor sighed, her breath fogging the glass. She'd been up since 5 a.m., unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts she'd suppressed for too long. She'd spent years putting everyone else's needs above her own, and now she realized the cost. She'd lost herself in the process. If I'd spoken up sooner, if I'd told Robert how I felt, maybe we wouldn't be here, she thought. The first lesson she was beginning to learn was clear: don't wait to communicate your needs. Silence can erode a relationship as surely as any argument. Robert, she called, her voice steady but soft. He was in the living room, reading the newspaper, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. At 62, he was still handsome, silver hair, sharp jawline, the kind of man who aged like fine wine. But the distance between them had grown so vast that Eleanor sometimes forgot what it felt like to be close to him. They hadn't shared a bed in months, not since she'd started sleeping in the guest room after a particularly quiet anniversary dinner last fall. He looked up, his expression neutral, almost detached. "What is it, Elle?" "I think we need to talk," she said, her heart pounding. She'd rehearsed this moment for months, maybe years, but the words still felt foreign. I don't think I can do this anymore." Robert lowered the newspaper, his brow furrowing. "Do what?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely around the room, at the life they'd built. The living room was a time capsule of their marriage, faded floral curtains she'd sewn herself in the 90s, a bookshelf filled with photo albums and Robert's accounting textbooks, a worn-out couch where they'd once cuddled with their kids to watch Saturday morning cartoons. "Us. I think we need to separate." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stared at her, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're not serious," he said finally, his voice low. "After all these years?" "We're fine, Eleanor. We've always been fine." But that was the problem, wasn't it? They'd been fine for so long that neither of them had noticed when fine turned into empty. The kids had grown up and moved out. The house was too big, the conversations too small. They'd stopped fighting years ago, not because they'd resolved their issues, but because they'd stopped caring enough to fight. Eleanor had felt it building for a long time, this quiet revolution inside her, but she hadn't known how to name it until now. She realized now that complacency can be a silent killer in a marriage, a lesson she wished she'd learned decades ago. "I'm serious," she said, her voice trembling now. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. I don't want to spend the rest of my life like this, Robert. I can't." He stood up, his movements slow, deliberate. "You're talking about divorce," he said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "At our age? Do you know what that means? The house, the savings, the kids, everything we've built, it'll all fall apart." "I know," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "But I can't keep pretending. Not anymore." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their early years when he was stressed about work or the kids. "This is insane, Eleanor. We're not 30 anymore. We can't just start over. What are people going to say? What are the kids going to think?" "I don't care what people say," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "And the kids, they'll understand eventually. They have to. I need to do this for me, Robert. I've spent my whole life doing things for everyone else, for you, for the kids, for this family. I need to figure out who I am now. He shook his head, his jaw tight. You're being selfish, he said, the words cutting deeper than he probably intended. You're throwing away everything we've worked for. Eleanor flinched but didn't back down. Maybe I am, she said. But I'd rather be selfish now than miserable for the rest of my life. She paused, then added, we should have talked more, Robert. We should have checked in with each other. If there's one piece of advice I'd give anyone, it's this: don't let the years slip by without really seeing the person you're with. Chapter 2: The Weight of a Lifetime. Over the next few weeks, the reality of their decision began to sink in. Eleanor moved her things into the guest bedroom permanently, packing her clothes into boxes as if she were preparing for a long trip. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a battleground. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations clipped and practical, about bills, schedules, and who would take the car to the mechanic. Robert hired a lawyer, a gruff man named Harold who specialized in late-life divorces, and Eleanor found a lawyer of her own, a kind woman named Linda who assured her she wasn't alone in this. The kids, Sarah, Michael, and Emily, were stunned when they heard the news. Eleanor and Robert decided to tell them together, setting up a Zoom call one Sunday evening. Sarah, their eldest at 35, was a mother of 2 living in Boston with her husband, a pediatrician named David. Michael, 32, was a software engineer in Seattle, single and focused on his career. Emily, the youngest at 28, was an artist living in New York, always the free spirit of the family. Mom, Dad, how could you do this? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Her 2-year-old son, Liam, was babbling in the background, and Eleanor could hear the exhaustion in her daughter's tone. You've been together forever. You're the most stable couple I know. I mean, you're the ones we all look up to. That's the problem, Eleanor said quietly, glancing at Robert, who sat stiffly beside her on the couch. We've been together so long that we forgot how to really be together. We've been living separate lives under the same roof for years. If there's a lesson here for you, Sarah, it's to keep nurturing your relationship with David, even when life gets busy. Don't let the routine drown out the connection. Michael, always the more pragmatic of the 3, chimed in, his voice sharp. So what, you're just giving up? What about the grandkids? What about us? You can't just dismantle everything like this. Eleanor's heart ached at the hurt in her son's voice, but she couldn't back down now. This isn't about you, sweetheart, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. This is about me and your father. We've given everything to this family, but I need to figure out who I am outside of being a wife and a mother. I need to live for myself, even if it's just for a little while. Michael, I hope you learn from this, don't lose yourself in your work or your roles. Make time for what makes you feel alive. Emily, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. I get it, she said, her voice soft but firm. I mean, I don't like it, but I get it. I wish you'd told us sooner how unhappy you were. We could have helped, maybe. Eleanor wished that too, but she hadn't known how to articulate it. For so long, she'd buried her feelings under the weight of her responsibilities. She'd been the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother, always organizing family gatherings, baking cookies for the grandkids, remembering everyone's birthdays. But now, at 58, she wanted more. She wanted to feel alive again, to rediscover the woman she'd been before life had shaped her into someone else. Emily, my advice to you is to always be honest with yourself and the people you love, she said. Don't hide your struggles, it only makes them heavier. Robert, who'd been silent through most of the call, finally spoke. I didn't see this coming either, he admitted, his voice low. I thought we were okay. I thought we'd grow old together. I wish I'd paid more attention, asked more questions. If I could go back, I'd tell myself to listen more, to really hear her. The kids didn't know how to respond to that, and the call ended with an awkward goodbye. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt as she closed her laptop. She knew this was hard on them, but she also knew she couldn't keep living a lie, not for their sake, not for anyone's. Chapter 3, Voices from the Past. As the divorce proceedings began, Eleanor found herself seeking solace outside the home. She joined a support group for women over 50 navigating divorce, a small gathering that met every Tuesday evening at the local community center. The room was filled with women like her, some older, some younger, but all carrying the same quiet strength. They sat in a circle, sharing their stories over cups of chamomile tea, and Eleanor felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. "I was 67 when I left my husband," said Marian, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She wore a lavender cardigan that looked hand-knitted, and her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "We'd been married for 40 years, but I hadn't felt seen in a decade. I thought, if not now, then when? I didn't want to die wondering what my life could have been. My advice to anyone listening is this: don't wait until it's too late to chase your own happiness. You deserve to live fully, no matter your age." Another woman, Patricia, shared her story, her voice steadier but tinged with regret. "I didn't know how to be alone," she admitted, tucking a strand of gray hair behind her ear. "I didn't want to grow old next to someone who felt like a roommate. So I left at 59. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most freeing. I started volunteering after retirement, and I realized I had more joy in those 3 hours a week than I'd had in the last decade of my marriage. If I could go back, I'd tell myself to build a life outside my marriage sooner: hobbies, friends, passions. Don't let your identity be defined by just one role." Eleanor listened, taking in their words. These women were part of a growing trend, gray divorce, they called it. The facilitator, a therapist named Dr. Karen Ellis, explained that more and more couples over 50 were choosing to part ways, driven by longer life expectancies, changing social norms, and a desire for personal fulfillment. "People are living longer, healthier lives," Dr. Ellis said, her voice calm and authoritative. "And with 30 to 50 years potentially ahead after 50, many begin to ask, do I want to spend the rest of my life like this? My advice to all of you is to take this as an opportunity to rediscover yourself. It's never too late to start anew." Eleanor felt a strange sense of camaraderie with these women. She wasn't alone. She shared her own story, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger as she spoke. "I feel like I've been asleep for years," she said. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I just know I can't keep living like this. I wish I'd learned earlier that relationships need constant care, like a garden, you have to keep tending to it, or it withers." The other women nodded, their expressions a mix of empathy and understanding. "You'll figure it out," Marian said, reaching over to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "It takes time, but you'll find yourself again. And here's a piece of advice: be kind to yourself during this process. You're not failing, you're growing." Meanwhile, Robert was struggling in his own way. He'd always been the stoic one, the provider, the man who kept his emotions in check. But the divorce was unraveling him. He confided in his brother, Tom, over a beer one evening at a local pub called the Rusty Anchor. The bar was dimly lit, with old wooden tables and a jukebox playing classic rock in the corner. "I don't get it," Robert said, his voice thick with frustration as he stared into his glass of IPA. "We had a good life. A great life. Why is she doing this? I worked so hard, 60-hour weeks for years, making sure we had everything we needed. And now she says it's not enough?" Tom, who'd been divorced himself at 45, sighed and leaned back in his chair. He was a few years younger than Robert, with a scruffy beard and a laid-back demeanor that contrasted with Robert's buttoned-up personality. "Maybe it wasn't as great for her as it was for you," Tom said, his tone gentle but firm. "Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us until it's too late. If she's been unhappy for years, that's on both of you. My advice? Don't just focus on what you provided materially, think about what she needed emotionally. A marriage isn't just a partnership on paper, it's a partnership of hearts." Robert didn't want to hear that. He wanted to blame Eleanor, to believe she was being selfish. But deep down, he knew Tom was right. He'd stopped asking Eleanor about her dreams, her fears, her hopes. He'd assumed they were on the same page because they always had been. But people change, and he hadn't noticed. He thought back to the early years of their marriage, how they'd stay up late talking about their plans, how Eleanor would laugh at his terrible jokes, how they'd dance in the kitchen to old Motown records. When had that stopped? When had they become strangers? I should have been more present, he said quietly. That's the lesson I'm learning now. Don't take your partner for granted. I don't know what to do now, Robert admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I'd retire in a few years, travel with her, maybe buy a little cabin upstate. Now, I don't even know who I am without her. Tom clapped a hand on his shoulder. You'll figure it out, Rob, he said. It's not the end of the world. It just feels like it right now. My advice is to start small, find something that brings you joy, something that's just for you. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. Now it's time to take care of yourself. Chapter 4: The Fallout. The practical consequences of the divorce were staggering. They had to sell the house, a decision that broke Eleanor's heart. The house had been more than just a home, it was a repository of memories. She could still hear the echo of her children's laughter in the backyard, see the dent in the hallway where Michael had accidentally thrown a baseball, smell the cinnamon rolls she'd baked every Christmas morning. But keeping the house wasn't feasible for either of them financially, so they put it on the market. The sale was quick, a young family bought it, eager to start their own story within its walls. Eleanor and Robert split the proceeds, but after legal fees, taxes, and paying off the remaining mortgage, there wasn't much left. Their savings were divided, and Robert's pension was reduced to account for Eleanor's share. At their age, rebuilding financially felt daunting. Eleanor's lawyer, Linda, warned her that financial splits in late-life divorces often left both parties struggling. You're starting over at a time when most people are planning for retirement, Linda said. It's not going to be easy. My advice is to plan carefully, budget wisely, and don't be afraid to seek financial advice. You'll need to be resourceful now. Eleanor moved into a small apartment in town, a one-bedroom with a tiny balcony where she could grow a few plants. The apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building, with creaky hardwood floors and a view of the town square. It was a far cry from the sprawling home she'd left behind, but it was hers. She spent her first night there unpacking a single box of keepsakes, photos of the kids, a quilt her mother had made, a small ceramic bird she'd bought on her honeymoon in Maine. For the first time in decades, she had a space that was entirely her own, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her. Robert stayed with Tom for a while before renting a condo nearby. The condo was modern, with sleek stainless steel appliances and a minimalist design that felt cold to him. He missed the warmth of their old home, the clutter of family life. He threw himself into work, taking on extra hours at the accounting firm where he'd been a partner for 30 years. But the loneliness crept in at night, when the house was quiet and there was no one to share it with. He started drinking more than usual, a glass of whiskey turning into 3, then 4, a habit he'd never had before. Their health suffered too. Eleanor struggled with anxiety, her mind racing with what-ifs. What if she'd made the wrong choice? What if she ended up alone forever? What if the kids never forgave her? She started waking up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, unable to catch her breath. She saw a therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Patel, who helped her work through her fears. You're grieving, Dr. Patel told her. Not just the marriage, but the life you thought you'd have. It's okay to feel this way. My advice is to let yourself feel these emotions, don't bottle them up. And find healthy outlets, like exercise or creative hobbies, to manage the stress. Robert, meanwhile, noticed his blood pressure creeping up at his last doctor's visit. The stress of the divorce was taking its toll, and his doctor warned him to cut back on the drinking and find healthier ways to cope. You're not a young man anymore, Robert, the doctor said, his tone stern but kind. You need to take care of yourself. My advice is to prioritize your health, eat well, exercise, and maybe talk to someone about what you're going through. You don't have to do this alone. The kids were affected too. Sarah, who'd always been close to her parents, found herself caught in the middle, trying to mediate their arguments. She'd call Eleanor one day, then Robert the next, listening to their frustrations and trying to stay neutral. It was exhausting, especially with two young kids of her own to care for. Michael distanced himself, refusing to take sides. He stopped returning Eleanor's calls, and when Robert tried to talk to him about the divorce, he'd change the subject. Emily, who'd always been the free spirit of the family, started spending more time with Eleanor, helping her decorate the new apartment and encouraging her to try new things. "You're going to be okay, Mom," Emily said one afternoon as they hung a piece of her artwork, a vibrant abstract painting, on the living room wall. "You're stronger than you think. But if I can offer some advice, don't let guilt hold you back. You're allowed to put yourself first sometimes." Chapter 5, A New Beginning. One evening, as Eleanor sat on her balcony sipping chamomile tea, she realized something. She felt lighter. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of a marriage that had stopped working. She was free to rediscover herself, to figure out who she was at 58. The sun was setting over the town square, casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets, and Eleanor felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. "If there's one piece of advice I'd give myself now," she thought, "it's to embrace change, even when it's scary. Growth happens outside your comfort zone." She started small. She joined a book club at the local library, where she met a group of women her age who loved to laugh and share stories. They read everything from historical fiction to memoirs, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to their weekly meetings. She took up painting, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. She bought a set of watercolors and a sketchbook, setting up a small easel on her balcony. Her first few paintings were clumsy, blurry landscapes and lopsided flowers, but she didn't care. It felt good to create something, to lose herself in the colors and shapes. She even started traveling, first to New York to visit Emily, who took her to art galleries and trendy cafes in Brooklyn. Eleanor loved the energy of the city, the way it buzzed with possibility. Then, on a whim, she booked a solo trip to Spain. She'd always wanted to see Barcelona, with its whimsical gaudy architecture and vibrant street markets. The trip terrified her. She'd never traveled alone before, but it also exhilarated her. She spent 2 weeks wandering the narrow streets of the Gothic Quarter, sipping sangria at outdoor cafes, and marveling at the Sagrada Familia. "I went to Spain at 58, she told her book club friends one evening, her eyes bright with pride. "It was the first time I felt alive in years. My advice to anyone listening is this: don't be afraid to try something new, no matter how old you are. You might surprise yourself." Robert's journey was slower, more hesitant, but he started to open up too. He joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning in a nearby state park. The group was a mix of ages, some retirees like him, some younger professionals looking to escape the city for a day. Robert had never been much of an outdoorsman, but he found solace in the rhythm of walking, the crunch of leaves under his boots, the quiet of the forest. One of the group members, a man named Carl who was a few years younger than Robert, became a friend. Carl had gone through a divorce a few years earlier and understood what Robert was going through. "It gets better," Carl told him one day as they sat on a ridge overlooking a valley. "You just have to give it time." "My advice? Find a routine that grounds you, something that gives you a sense of purpose." Robert also started volunteering at a local community center, helping kids with their math homework. He'd always been good with numbers, and he found that teaching brought him a sense of purpose he'd been missing. One of the kids, a shy 12-year-old named Jamal, reminded Robert of Michael at that age, smart but reserved, always second-guessing himself. Robert spent extra time with Jamal, helping him with algebra and encouraging him to believe in himself. "You've got this, Jamal," he'd say. "Don't let fear hold you back." It wasn't much, but it felt like a step forward, and Robert realized the lesson he was teaching Jamal applied to himself too. Confidence comes from taking small steps forward, even when you're unsure. Chapter 6, Unexpected Connections. As Eleanor settled into her new life, she began to form unexpected friendships. At the book club, she met a woman named Clara, a 60-year-old retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor and a love for gardening. Clara invited Eleanor to join her at a community garden a few blocks from the apartment, and the two of them spent Saturday mornings tending to a small plot of vegetables. Eleanor loved the feel of the soil between her fingers, the satisfaction of watching something grow. "You're a natural," Clara told her one day as they harvested a batch of zucchini. "You should have been a farmer. My advice is to keep finding things that bring you joy like this. It's the little things that rebuild your life." Clara also introduced Eleanor to a local pottery class, something neither of them had tried before. The class was held in a small studio filled with the earthy smell of clay, and Eleanor found the process of shaping a lump of clay into a bowl or vase surprisingly therapeutic. She wasn't very good at it, her first few pieces were lopsided and cracked in the kiln, but she didn't care. It was about the process, not the result. "Don't aim for perfection," the instructor told the class one day. "Aim for progress." Eleanor took that advice to heart, applying it to her life as much as her pottery. Through Clara, Eleanor also met Daniel, a 64-year-old widower who volunteered at the community garden. Daniel was quiet but kind, with a gentle smile and a passion for history. He'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier and was still navigating life on his own. He and Eleanor struck up a tentative friendship, bonding over their shared love of books and gardening. They started meeting for coffee once a week, talking about everything from their favorite novels to their childhoods. "You're easy to talk to," Daniel told her one day, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "I haven't felt this comfortable with someone in a long time." Eleanor wasn't sure if it would turn into anything more. She wasn't ready for romance, but she enjoyed his company. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. "My advice to you, Daniel," she said, "is to keep opening up like this. Connection is what keeps us going." Robert, too, found himself forming new connections. Through the hiking group, he met Linda, a 55-year-old divorcee who worked as a high school teacher. Linda was warm and outgoing, the kind of person who could make anyone feel at ease. She and Robert started talking more during hikes, sharing stories about their lives. Linda had been divorced for 5 years and had 2 grown daughters. "It's hard at first," she told Robert one day as they walked along a trail. "But it gets easier. You start to realize you're enough on your own. My advice is to be patient with yourself, you don't have to have it all figured out right away." Robert wasn't sure he was ready for a relationship either, but he appreciated Linda's friendship. She invited him to a trivia night at a local bar, and to his surprise, he had fun. He even answered a few questions correctly, mostly about history and classic rock, and the team cheered for him. It was a small thing, but it made him feel like he was part of something again. "Keep saying yes to new experiences," Linda told him as they left the bar. "That's how you grow." Chapter 7, Lessons Learned. A year after the divorce, Eleanor and Robert met for coffee at a small cafe in town. It was the first time they'd sat down together without lawyers or kids present. The cafe was cozy, with mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly baked scones in the air. They sat at a table by the window, watching people pass by on the street outside. The air between them was still heavy with the weight of their shared history, but there was something else too, a quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," Robert said, his voice soft as he stirred his coffee. "I didn't see how unhappy you were. I should have. My biggest lesson from all of this is to never stop checking in with the people you love. I took you for granted, and I'll never make that mistake again." Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry too. I should have spoken up sooner. But I think this was the right thing for both of us. My lesson is that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. I spent so long trying to be everything for everyone that I forgot to be something for myself." They talked for hours that day, about the past, the present, and the future. They reminisced about the early days of their marriage, how they'd saved up for their first car, a beat-up Ford that broke down on their way to their honeymoon, how they'd stayed up all night with Sarah when she had the flu as a baby, how they'd celebrated Robert's promotion with a bottle of cheap champagne. They laughed, they cried, and they realized that their marriage hadn't failed, it had simply run its course. They'd grown apart, but that didn't erase the love they'd once had, or the family they'd built together. "I've been hiking," Robert said at one point, a small smile on his face. "Never thought I'd be the outdoorsy type, but it's been good for me. Clears my head. I've learned that finding new passions can help you heal." Eleanor smiled back. "I've been painting," she said. "And I went to Spain. Can you believe that? Me, traveling alone at 58. I've learned that it's never too late to rediscover yourself." Robert chuckled. "I can't believe you didn't get lost," he teased, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. As they parted ways, Eleanor felt a sense of peace. She'd learned that relationships need care, even after 30 years. She'd learned that growing together is a conscious effort, that silence can be more dangerous than yelling, and that love, in any stage of life, must evolve to survive. And most of all, she'd learned that it's never too late to start over. "My final piece of advice to you, Robert," she said as they stood to leave, "is to keep being open to change. We're not done growing yet." Chapter 8, A Family Rebuilt. The divorce had strained Eleanor and Robert's relationship with their children, but over time, they began to rebuild those connections. Sarah invited both of them to her son Liam's 3rd birthday party, a small gathering in her backyard in Boston. It was the first time Eleanor and Robert had been in the same place with the whole family since the divorce, and the kids were nervous about how it would go. But Eleanor and Robert were determined to make it work, for their children, for their grandchildren, and for themselves. Eleanor arrived first, carrying a homemade cake decorated with blue frosting and toy dinosaurs, Liam's favorite. Robert came shortly after, bringing a gift wrapped in bright paper, a set of wooden blocks he'd picked out himself. They greeted each other with a polite nod, and Eleanor felt a flicker of relief when she saw that he looked well. His face was tanned from hiking, and there was a new lightness in his step. The party was a success. Liam ran around the yard with his cousins, giggling as Sarah's husband, David, chased them with a water gun. Eleanor and Robert sat on opposite sides of the picnic table, but they joined in the laughter, cheering as Liam blew out his candles. Michael, who'd been distant for months, sat next to Robert and talked about a new project at work, his tone warmer than it had been in a long time. Emily pulled Eleanor aside to show her a new sketch she'd been working on, a portrait of the family that included both her parents, standing side by side but not touching. Later, as the sun began to set, Sarah raised a glass of lemonade and a toast. "To family," she said, her voice catching. "I know things have been hard this year, but I'm so glad we're all here together." She paused, then added, "I've learned something from all of this: don't take your family for granted. Make time for each other, even when it's hard." Eleanor and Robert exchanged a glance, and for the first time in a long time, they felt like a team again, not as husband and wife, but as parents and grandparents who shared a history and a love for their family. Closing, a direct appeal with lessons. That evening, Eleanor sat down at her desk in her apartment and wrote a letter to her children. She wanted them to understand what she'd been through, and what she'd learned. The letter was long, filled with memories and reflections, but it ended with a message of hope and advice. "Marriage changes after 30 years, she wrote, her pen moving steadily across the page. You might be in your 30s, thinking long-term, or maybe you're already wondering what's next. Whatever the case, you're not alone. Your story isn't over." We talk about a man whose wife left him at 58. How it broke him. And how he put the pieces back together. I've seen that man, your father, find his way again. And I found mine too. Here are the lessons I hope you take from this: always communicate openly with your partner, never stop growing together, and don't be afraid to start over if you need to. Life is too short to live unhappily. See you then. She folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, addressing it to Sarah, Michael, and Emily. She knew they might not fully understand now, but she hoped they would someday. For now, she was content to keep moving forward, one step at a time, into the life she was building for herself.